Stephen McConnell, welcome back to the podcast. We're going to finish up a few loose ends that we didn't get to in our last conversation, which was smashing people. If you haven't listened to it already, you need to listen to it before you start here on this. So, last week we ended our conversation. You touched a bit on cystatin or cystatin C. So, can we start there? Can you explain
Sure.
what that is and how it can be used to not only make a diagnosis of kidney issues, disease, but also, I think, if I'm correct, and of course you're the expert, can cystatin C be used to identify different stages of kidney disease?
Oh, absolutely. Here's a real quick skinny. For decades, all that was evaluated to determine you had kidney disease was your GFR. Well, that's a filtration rate, glomerular filtration rate. It's looking at how well your kidneys filter.
Mhm.
And they used to use one of three substances. Probably the most common would have been inulin. And if you're not clearing it quickly compared to a normal person, they can figure out a percentage of what the clearance is, whether it's totally normal or 80% or 50%. Well, it's laborious. It's going to cost more because it takes a lot of time. It takes 24 hours. I've never had one done, but they don't do them anymore. And they said, well, we need a surrogate, something that will estimate. So there's a little e with capital G, capital F, capital R.
Mhm.
E meaning estimated. Well, creatinine seemed to be the candidate of choice. But as medicine's evolved and technology's evolved, it turns out that when you look at lab work, they'll say greater than 60 is normal for your GFR. Well, that's stage two, 61. And a perfect GFR, which would put you at stage one or like zero, would be around 100, 90 to 100.
Mhm.
So they're skipping two stages by definition on every reference lab. Well, what if the creatinine says you're greater than 60 and you actually have a GFR of 50? That happens more than half the time. In fact, it's close to 60%. And what does that mean? The GFR said you're normal because you're greater than 60, which would put you maybe at stage two. Well, you're actually stage 3A or 3B. And that continues right through the spectrum. And in elderly people, that's particularly the case because age, muscle mass, gender, and race influence creatinine. I think that last count, they had 12 different formulas. Well, if you have 12 formulas, it wouldn't take a lot of intuition to realize that's a not reliable marker.
Mhm.
And they basically break it into two formulas, African American, non African American. But then again, there's a lot of racial prejudice. There has always been in medicine to races. And these people get overlooked. There's four times as many African Americans on dialysis as there are Caucasians. And part of the problem is the diagnostic criteria and mythology that's still pervasive in medicine. So, how do you get around that? You order a better biomarker. Cystatin C was compared to the gold standard, a direct GFR, and then they also tested everybody with statin C and creatinine. The creatinine was wrong 57% of the time when you're borderline low, somewhere between stage two and three. And the error persists even above that into stage four. The cystatin C only had a 7% error rate. And every time it said you were at a certain stage, you were at that stage. There
Mhm.
was no restaging necessary. So why do we still use the creatinine? Because it's cheap. Insurance companies don't want to spend more money. They want to hold on to most of your insurance premium. And they've dummied down medicine by overworking doctors with too heavy of a caseload every day. Now, that's a doctor who depends on insurance for reimbursement. They used to get 75% of every dollar they billed out, probably 40 or 50 years ago. Now it's less than 10%. So if they used to have a nurse and a file cabinet and the doctor, now they got 10 or 15 people who have to chase the insurance companies, phone calls, fax machines,
Mhm.
uh, shuffling paperwork. And the insurance companies spend a lot of money delaying care. And that's what they do. It's a fact. It's not just an opinion. So what's happening is medicine's got stupider and stupider, even though the technology's improved. I recommend to patients they just buck up, buy the damn lab work. You go online, you know what to order, you can get it.
Hmm.
Now I work with a direct. That's my hairdresser. I hope she's not asking me to come early. She does that at the drop of a hat. Let me double check. Start again. Sorry for the delay. Anyway, you got to get a cystatin C. Well, here's
So
the
what
other
you're,
problem.
hold on, what you're basically saying now for the average person, if your doctor's only looking at the EGFR and they tell you you're normal, you're probably not.
You're probably not. You're at least a stage worse, right? So if he said you're normal, you're probably not. If they said, well, you're stage 3, you're probably stage 4 or much closer to stage 4 because not too long ago they took stage 3 and divided it in half, 3A, 3B. So it's technically 6 stages: 1, 2, 3A, 3B, 4, and 5. 5 is when they pressure you to accept dialysis or transplant list or die at home with hospice. The only other option is somebody like me who actually knows a bit more and can do something about it. Well, here's the other problem. The creatinine says you're not at much risk. You're stage 1 or 2. Well, the doctor is going to assume that's a reasonable surrogate. He's not going to check your urine for protein. When in actuality, there probably already is protein in the urine, even at stage 1 and 2. But they're two separate things. The damage is best reflected by protein in the urine. And some people notice there's bubbles when
Mm.
they pee, when they urinate. That's pretty reliable qualitative sign. But you got to run the urine. If they won't order it, you have to ask for it. If they won't do it after you ask for it, you probably need to get a second opinion from somebody who's more aware of these things. I'm being kind. Um,
So can the protein in the urine be a once off, maybe just influenced by inflammation or an infection or something?
Possibly, but if there's damage at all, there'd be a consistent pattern because usually if the urine fails and you're above 30, there's a number of different types of nomenclature, but most labs in the US, greater than 30 is A2. That's, significant moderate loss of protein. Above 300 is severe. That's A3. A stands for albumin, which is the protein they measure. And for accuracy, they run it as a ratio because creatinine is high in the blood, your GFR is low. But then, of course, it's not being filtered, so it'll be low in the urine. So it's much more sensitive to have the protein divided by the creatinine. They
Mm.
call it albumin creatinine ratio. And there's a number of symbols for that, like a lowercase u for urine, and then ACR, or uh, what's the other one I see? Creatinine ratio, or there's a bunch of names. That's part of the problem. They need to standardize the nomenclature on the lab work and the range of values, because sometimes you see microalbumin creatinine ratio. Well, microalbumin is very small albumin particles, and those are the first to migrate through a damaged filter, glomerulus. And then there's larger proteins that also start to accumulate later on. The standard is the albumin creatinine ratio. Ask for it even if there's no evidence you have kidney disease. You got blood pressure problems, you got blood sugar problems. That includes prediabetes, insulin resistance, even if it's mild. There's probably already some damage. Well, how do you know? You have to measure it or you miss the diagnosis. And what you measure has everything to do with how reliable the diagnosis is. So there's more to it than blood sugar and blood pressure. LP little a, well, that causes heart disease, and it's the most dangerous marker for that. And that would include ischemic stroke. That's vascular disease. If your arteries are not healthy, the blood supply to the kidneys and what's usually in there, oxidation and inflammation, will affect the kidneys.
Hmm.
And then there's other things like low thyroid. Well, that's kind of like a chicken or the egg. I see that before they get full-blown kidney disease, but I also see it if you have kidney disease, you develop low thyroid.
Mm.
And there's other things that affect that, including the acidosis. Well, 86.1% of acidosis across all stages. And of course, it's closer to 100% when you get to stage 4 and 5. That affects the thyroid's production.
Mm.
because the iodides, which constitutes the hormones, T2, T3, and T4, those are the abbreviations, levothyroxine, triiodothyronine, those are the hormones that keep your body's cells tuned up. It's constantly tuning up the cell, much like an engine, giving you new spark plugs and a tune-up. But when it's low, it's not doing its job. But when you're acidotic, the thyroglobulin in the thyroid can't assemble those iodides efficiently. It wants a pH of 7.6. Well, if you have acidosis, the whole body is lower than that, so it's struggling. Plus, the kidneys are leaking thyroids hormones and thyroglobulin. Everything the thyroid makes is going through the kidneys. So you have impaired function and loss of retention. And that's why 75% of low thyroid is closer to 90% when you get to stage 4. And I rule it out, not with blood work, which is, again, not very reliable. It's not optimally reliable. Most doctors that have read a few things on this know that. Well, how did they use it when they developed the gold standard? They ran the blood work, and even before a full panel of thyroid results was available, they used to do qualitative questions, and the quantitative marker was to have a low basal metabolic rate, which equates to a low basal temperature. And Broda Otto Barnes, as you know, came up with that. And when you run that and their body temperature is low at rest, it has to be done properly. You have to be in bed before you get out of bed, still sleepy, in a very relaxed state. That's your lowest basal metabolic rate. You capture an axillary temperature under your armpit. 10 minutes later, you write that number down when the timer goes off. And you do that 5 mornings. And I have them do a home glucose challenge, which is a big meal with some carbohydrates, 60 minutes after you have the first bite of food. Same kitchen timer, just 2 different scenarios looking for 2 different things. Those are free home tests. You do need a glucometer and a thermometer. But now I know if your thyroid's low, and I also know if somebody overlooks that you have mild insulin resistance. In the United States, it's rare to have a patient come in that's an adult and not have insulin resistance. I might see that out of once in 1,000 people. But are you mild, moderate, or severe? A meal challenge duplicates what you do in a laboratory when you come in fasting and you drink glucola, which is sugar syrup. And that'll challenge your pancreas. And then an hour later, you can check it. Some order a 1 hour or 2 hour, real picky doctors, and I respect that. They do a 30-minute after the glucola because they do a baseline fasting, then 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, and 2 hours. That's pretty elaborate, but there's some subtle things that pop up with that. In fact, if you're trying to determine late acquired type 1, because type 1 used to just be juvenile diabetes, but it happens in adults. It's when they often have an autoimmune destruction of their beta cells that make the insulin. And as those cells wither, they can't keep up with the stress from a meal, and the glucose goes up, and insulin sensitizers at some point won't work anymore, and they're going to have to take injected insulin. Well, it's good to spot these things earlier. 99% of them do not have type 1. They've got type 2. But if you're checking after a meal challenge, you can see that. Likewise, thyroid. If I check the body temperature and it's low, I don't care who argues the point, but that's the gold standard. It's been in the literature for 50 or 60 years. And when you run it and they've got a low basal temperature, 5 readings, and most of them are low, and 3 of them are identical, they come in with a Fahrenheit of 95, 96, 97.8 is low. You're supposed to treat it 97.8.
I had a
And
lady
that's,
this morning and she was 33.5 Celsius. I'll have to convert that. But I was like,
you
that's
go right ahead.
hypothermia. That's like so low. So
And
because
they don't feel well. They usually tell you something qualitative. I have brain fog. I'm not as sharp as I used to be. I don't have the energy I used to have. I feel cold. I wear a sweater and everyone else has shorts and t-shirts on. I mean, there's like qualitative list of 20.
so
If you
that's
feel
90, that's 91.94 Fahrenheit. And
that's
but
horrible.
I know, but she had done a really long flight because she's a pilot, and then so a lot of inflammation, circadian rhythm disruption, didn't sleep properly. But I'm like, you should probably be dead. Dead people are warmer than that.
Yeah, and you know what? They still argue that T4 is all you need, levothyroxine. Well, excuse me. What if your deiodinase levels are inadequate to convert it to T3? Now you have a whole bunch of T4 sitting around doing nothing because that's not the active hormone. It's the triiodothyronine, the T3, that's active. And then there's barriers to binding to the thyroid receptors in every cell, like triglycerides, free fatty acids, insulin resistance. So there's more to it than just giving him T4.
Mm,
And that's why desiccated works so well.
mm,
And I see it all the time when somebody I'm working with is switched to desiccated. You're literally taking a thyroid gland, removing the water, turning it into a powder, and then standardizing how much is in there per milligram. And when you administer it, you're correcting almost the entire cascade of problems. In fact, um, growth hormone is critical to maintain functionality of the deiodinases because the deiodinases activate T4. It strips off, it deiodinates iodines, took one of them away. Now you got the active T3.
mhm.
That's most of the problem. Niacin does that, and they didn't really realize until in the 90s, they suspected it. Now they figured it out because niacin,
So niacin
uh,
will remove an iodine?
well, what it does is it stimulates growth hormone. They're starting to use it for kids with stunted growth,
Mm,
dwarfism and so forth. And it doesn't change your growth per se when you're an adult, but it stimulates a lot of positive reactions in the body. One of them is it enables deiodinase to convert T4 to T3. And that explained this mystery from an early cardiac trial on niacin, where they couldn't understand how patients were becoming euthyroid, and it was counterintuitive to the blood work. Well, the
mm,
blood work is notoriously wrong a lot of the time. And when you've got kidney disease, I don't even look at the blood work because it'll mislead you. And that's what happens in every doctor's office pretty much. I have to do the body temperature, and then I document it, make a printable copy, turn it around to the patient and say, show that to your doctor. If he sneers at or says that doesn't mean anything,
mhm.
question that.
Yeah.
It's just like saying, oh, your LDL's low, you're not at risk. That doesn't mean anything.
Mm,
You got to order ApoB and LP little a. Well, in my world, if it's actionable and it's accessible to the patient to get better blood work, you can also show this doctor that refused to order it afterwards and see his reaction. If his reaction is anything but open-minded, get a referral to someone else. I'm not saying get rid of your doctor, but get a second opinion from somebody who actually understands this stuff.
mm,
That's a horrible thing to say, but I don't blame the doctor. Again, I have to qualify that. I'm blaming the system for doing this to the doctor so they're no longer aware of these things, so they don't have time to read. If they have to have continuing medical education credits, CMEs, they take an antibiotic test or something that's easy to pass, get their minimum number of credits and move on because they're working to 8 or 9 at night. They're up at 5. If you have any quality time at all, you're going to spend it with your family, not reading medical journals. They used to take Wednesdays off in golf, and the guys I admired would go back to their office because it was closed for the day,
mm,
and they had a pile of journal articles they wanted to catch up on.
mm.
And I've got a number of doctors that are like that. They're stuck in the insurance-based system, but they make time to learn new ideas. And a lot of them still don't have the time, of course,
Mhm.
but they call me because I'm reading all the time, and they've gotten into trusting me because of a pattern of reliability, credibility. And I can quote a lot of it without reading it to them. Oh, wow, I didn't know that. Great, thanks, Steve. They give me 5 minutes and disappear for a month. But I've elevated their ability to better detect a problem and give them alternate solutions besides a statin and
Yeah.
T4 the
They
usual
can better
bull
help
crap.
people because they're
Yeah,
almost outsourcing their knowledge base, which helps them save time but help
right.
their patients. There's a doctor here in town. Where I live is just outside Calgary. There's 100,000 people here and not enough doctors for everyone. But there's one doctor who a lot of my clients will go, I have a PDF blood panel, and I say, just print this off and ask your doctor to fill it. And this one doctor does it all the time. And he's at the stage now, well, he say, I don't fully understand what this means. I don't know a lot about this, but if Shemaine knows and she recommends it, I trust her, so we'll do it. So it's
That's
almost
a
like,
healthy relationship.
yeah,
That's a
it's
collegial
teamwork.
relationship. It benefits the patient, and the doctor doesn't have an attitude about something he doesn't completely know. He knows you're spending more time learning these things. And it doesn't matter which provider's making more money. Who's staying current? Who knows the history on these things? Who knows what a reliable biomarker looks like versus one that's not very reliable?
Mhm.
And if you get a kind of an obstinate, uh, non-participatory attitude from a provider, that's somebody who's close to burnout.
Mm.
They no longer want to try any harder than they have to. And they don't really have to try harder. They just have to keep an open mind that, hey, this other biomarker might be worth using. Don't deny the patient that opportunity. Just tell them you might have to pay cash for it. Well,
Yeah.
I can get a tremendous panel for $479. So that sounds like a lot, but the insurance companies are milking you for a couple thousand a month these days, and they're not giving any of that back to you. One, you get catastrophic care, which won't cost nearly as much, and pay for a good doctor, pay for good lab work,
Mhm.
and especially a doctor that knows what to do with the good lab work. Your care is going to be elevated, but why do you depend on the insurance company? Haven't they proven already they don't give a damn about you?
Mm.
And a single payer system is better for sure, but the point is that the best care might cost more money than some people are prepared to pay. But a car payment or less for the best blood work, I would, if I didn't know anything, I'd go, I want the better blood work. Because when I first got into this, I met a few people that have been doing it for quite a while. And they explained to me why they did it. And I thought, well, that made sense. It's a higher diagnostic yield. You're missing half the people with these cheap labs that only help their insurance companies save money. Not you, it's helping them. So why not spend the money and get better biomarkers? And then the people that would order that probably are using more advanced treatments, natural therapies, less expensive, safer, and more effective. And there's a stigma around pharmaceuticals like never before. They never want medication. I just got another referral from the pastor of this African American church I work with in Atlanta. Said that the patient has a cholesterol problem, as they put it, and they don't want to take any pharmaceutical medication, which means Lipitor, Crestor, and
Yeah,
all that
yeah.
other crap. Those things don't work as well as they advertise. And when they move a number down, that doesn't mean they move your risk down.
Mhm.
LDL is a worthless number. ApoB, that's a real number, and you don't even need to fast. LP little a, that's even more reality because 1 out of 4 people, it's elevated. If you didn't measure it, it doesn't matter what the LDL and the ApoB said. And the LDL is already off the table, but those are the two you need. The total particle number, which is ApoB. I don't really like the NMR. It's overkill. And they don't actually tell you all the particles. They just tell you the certain density range that correlates with LDL. Well, the VLDLs above that are lighter are all atherogenic, and the small dense are atherogenic. And of course, the LP little a is the most dangerous. It's 7 times worse than a regular ApoB particle. Why do you need 6 fractions? I want to know the total bad particles and the worst ones. And I can make a great assumption if you're American, you're insulin resistant, therefore you have small dense particles. And a number baseline and follow-up is useful, but you're beating up on a system that won't pay for that other marker as well. If I put you on an insulin sensitizer, there's less small dense particles. If I add niacin and fish oil, boom, problem solved. Lipitor and Crestor don't touch those, and neither do Repatha and Praluent. The receptors that or upregulating, remove particles. Only remove the largest, least dangerous ones. Leave the small, dense behind, and the statins, Lipitor and Crestor, increase the worst of them. So read something, for crying out loud. You'd know this. Some of my patients have read more about this than the cardiologists. And they go in there and start asking the cardiologist questions I've prompted them to ask, and the cardiologist gets defensive.
All snobby. Yeah.
They're mostly surgeons. How can they possibly be that adept at manipulating medication if they spend most of their time inserting stents? And they would agree with that, even though they wouldn't do it openly, because they pretty much do the same rudimentary medical management. Besides, they know more about the medication to prevent your stent from clotting off. Plavix, other blood thinners. If you've got congestive heart failure, they got to put you on, things to keep your heart from beating too aggressively. Things to strengthen the contraction and slow down the heart, because now you've got an infarct and that's never going to come back. It's a scar. They know about that, but they really don't know how you got there in the first place and how to prevent it. In their mind, it's an LDL problem. It's family history. That's a pretty broad stroke of the paintbrush. When in reality, there's things you bring on yourself, which insulin resistance. They usually don't check for that in a cardiology group. And LP(a), they never measure it. They put you on Lipitor or Crestor and make it worse. And the only cardiologist I've met that's really up to speed on this is Sotirios Sam Zemickas in San Diego. Look him up. He's at the University of Southern California, San Diego. He runs a lipid clinic. He calls it the LP(a) clinic. He's been using niacin to treat it for over 35 years. That guy knows what the hell he's talking about. He also knows that the statin could increase your risk and therefore could bring on the heart attack that you're predisposed for, because it's only lowering the 85% of the particles and the 15% it raised. Well, if the 15% is 7 times more dangerous, it outweighs the reduction in the 85%.
Yeah.
Because those particles are way more dangerous. You don't want to mess around with them.
So, Stephen, can we jump back to the acidic aspect? Because we are watching the clock today, and with
Right.
the acidic aspect and an acidic body, apart from an autoimmune influence, do you think most of this acidity is caused or contributed
Oh,
by
yeah.
diet and lifestyle?
Yeah.
Also, where does alcohol play a part in the kidneys and kidney health and the acidity? Because alcohol has to be filtered through the kidneys.
Right.
And then I'd love you to touch on gout as well.
Okay. They're all connected. Fructose, all carbs, but especially fructose, which is in processed food, drives up uric acid directly. And now you've got uricemia. That's going to take down the kidneys and it's going to cause damage to your whole body, especially the vasculature and internal organs. Acidosis, you usually see that alongside of elevated uric acid. It's hard to spot. The best measure is what they usually reserve for following up on kidney stones. Well, they're acidic, they're more prone to take these solids and form stones.
Yeah.
Well, if you run it and it's less than 28, that's abnormal. If it's less than 24, you're moderately severe acidosis. If it's less than 20, it's very severe acidosis. There's a surrogate on routine comprehensive metabolic profile that will indicate that's likely. I tell them if the CO2 is less than 28, order the urine citrate for confirmation. That's the gold standard. Now you need alkali to offset it.
Is that a factor as well in stones, as in gallstones as well?
Probably, I'd have to look that up, but
Okay.
that's more of a disequilibrium in the manufacture of bile, and the gallbladder stores it. So if you're just metabolic, it may coalesce from a fatty fluid into a stone, and now you got a real problem. And more often than not, they remove the gallbladder. But then you got to treat them with bile acid sequestrants or bile salt resins, bile acid resins, BARBAS. Those will bind the bile, because if you don't have the storage gland, it's a tiny little gland tucked under the liver that squirts during a meal into your intestine to digest fatty food. Well, it's there all the time, and now you get a sour stomach. My wife and daughter is genetic. They both had to have their gallbladder removed, but the only thing that takes away that kind of jaundice-like state, Kathy actually got kind of pale and yellow. It's because the bile was making her sick. It was being squirted around all day,
Mm-hmm.
and you only need it during mealtime. So bile acid sequestration binds the bile from a gallbladder that's overactive or no gallbladder to store it. And yeah, you could get stones. I would have to look that up and answer your question later,
Okay.
but there's probably a relationship because you usually see it in people who eat too much junk food, high carb diets.
And
Um,
gallbladder, did you know? You probably did. People who get, well, it was said that if you had to have your gallbladder removed, it was an early indication that hypothyroid was present, even if you hadn't got a diagnosis yet. So, if
yeah,
gallbladder issues basically are an indication that you have hypothyroid.
right. And then you got to get yet again another arm wrestling match with someone who might not be aware, and the point that you're running over your 12-minute encounter, and now they have to answer questions they may not know the answers to, and they don't like it when they're questioned. And the doctors that don't mind being questioned, that's a better attitude. But again, you can always get a second opinion, go to somebody that actually knows this stuff inside and out. You can find them by searching for integrative functional doctors or a naturopath. And
So,
that's most of my referring doctors fall into that classification.
what we're saying is that if your body is highly acidic, there could be autoimmune issues. There's most likely going to be nutrition and lifestyle
Yeah,
habits.
that could bring it on. Yeah.
uh, Alcohol, who we know it's a poison, but people, it's still accepted. Unlike doing
Well,
heroin, we still
right.
accept alcohol all the
Yeah.
time.
Well, I say carbohydrates are more addictive than heroin and fentanyl. And probably the most addictive is junk food, but also alcohol. Well, alcohol is the hardest to metabolize form of carbohydrates. It will drive your uric acid up. It'll cause insulin resistance. It puts a labor on the entire body, but you can get fatty liver just from drinking too much. And quite often I'll run a GGT because it's a bit more sensitive than the ALT and the AST to uncover alcohol abuse. And an old way of doing it in a lipid clinic is that triglycerides are high, but the HDL looks really good. But
Hmm.
it's a dysfunctional HDL, even though the HDL cholesterol is high. And I
Yeah.
don't really go with those markers that much anyway. The triglycerides tell you there's a problem because
Hmm.
that precedes fatty liver. So if somebody's drinking a lot, their HDL will look great, cholesterol HDL, but the triglycerides will be high. They're usually just the opposite. Trigs are high, HDL-C is low, but if you've been drinking a lot, run a GGT and a liver panel, and then have a come to Jesus moment with a patient. And don't say, are you drinking too much? Say, why are you drinking so much? Because, that's more like, I know you're drinking too much, and you're more likely to get a truthful response and not run over time on the encounter.
It
And then
blows
just
my
say,
mind
yeah,
how
you got
many
fatty liver.
people, yeah, it blows my mind how many people think alcohol is still harmless.
That's
Like
not
it's the idea that, oh, it's not that bad. It's not doing that much damage. It's doing a
right.
lot more than you think.
Well, it's old myths die hard.
Hmm.
Um, and it's all about facts and current reliable information. And I say reliable because the niacin bashing campaign is still in full swing. The problem is when you drill down, there's no basis in real facts. And the aim high trial, the HPS2 thrive in Europe. Well, do you want the facts? You just want to run off and believe that. Well, if you run off and believe it, you're probably someone I wouldn't sit still long enough for me to explain it to anyway. But there's reasons why that persisted. The old niacin studies were all executed properly. They only gave the niacin with food 3 times a day with meals. They knew that 3 grams was the target dose, not 1 gram, not 2 grams, and they never used sustained release. They tried it in one trial and realized it was a mistake because they saw the problems that happened with a long acting niacin. And then went back to old crystalline niacin, like William Costelli from the Framingham study used. I mean, he still takes it today, even though he's retired. The thing is, it's the safest. It's never been shown to have any safety issues or real risks associated with, and it's the cheapest and it works the best. And it's the only one that's safe enough to take more than once a day. And, that's the difference between current data that's fabricated versus based on real solid evidence.
So
And they
I
still come out with great niacin data every day. You just got to go to PubMed and type in niacin, and you blow your mind what came out in the last week or last month. It's all good.
so I cut you off on the gout there. I'm sorry. So what were you saying about gout? The kidney gout connection, uric acid.
Yeah. Uric acid forms crystals and then you get symptoms, and that can cause gout. Now, in some people, not that often, pretty rare, maybe 1 in 30, 1 in 50, you'll see the uric acid go up. Well, that's easy to control. I need the benefit of the niacin. Yep, that's my warning.
Mhm.
That we could be getting into a trouble area. Well, a lot of doctors, that's why they won't use it. Oh, uric acid goes up, homocysteine goes up. Homocysteine, 2/3 of them have a methylation defect, like me and my brother. Correct that. Don't drop the niacin because homocysteine went up. Uric acid, again, methylfolate, same thing I use for high homocysteine. Start there, that'll bring it down. There's a 20,000 patient long-term study in China where they gave plain folic acid at a low dose, 0.8 milligrams, 0.8.
Hmm.
And stroke was 21% lower than giving an allopurinol ACE inhibitor alone. Now they were looking at stroke and blood pressure, but they analyzed homocysteine, they checked for MTHFR status, and they did a CKD follow-up and a uric acid follow-up. Methylfolate was good for all of the above. And some people are resistant. You might need 2 or 3 agents to lower the homocysteine. Uric acid, tart cherry extract, methylfolate. There's a number of things that'll bring it down. And if you're worried about the gout, just get a tiny bottle of homeopathic colchicine. It's the oldest therapy for gout. They're pellets. I warn you right off the bat. If you order a tube on Amazon, don't open it up over a carpet. Don't open it up without having a bowl underneath
Well,
it.
yeah.
Those pellets scatter everywhere. I did this. I'm dumb too. And, I went, that's it. I probably lost a third of the pellets in the rug. So
Yeah.
I picked up the rest of them, and the tube was half empty. And I put it in an easier to administer container with a large mouth. And then when I need a couple of them for my wife or my daughter, I pour them into a small ramekin and wet my finger and pick them up one at a time because they're so small you can barely pick them up.
Yeah.
And 3 or 4 of those, the whole
So what was that called?
it's colchicine, but in the homeopathic form. In ancient Great Britain, the royalty ate a lot of red meat and red wine. The Puritans went up and they got gout. And you have pictures of kings of England with bandages around their big toe. That was one of the target sites who got gout. And it was very painful. Well, they discovered that in the autumn part of the year, there was a first known, I think, in the Mediterranean countries, called in the city of Colchi. And they named it colchicum, Colchi, and then Colchium. And because they harvested it when the bark was enriched with it near the end of the year, they called it colchicum autumnal, autumn with a ALE at the end. I love these old stories of how they come up with things. Well, you can buy it without a prescription on Amazon. It's $8 for a good sized tube. I buy a tube about every 6 months because my wife will occasionally get a flare up. She has to be on high dose niacin.
So your wife
4
has
grams a
gout?
day. Well, from the niacin, but before you even get the crystals, there's an inflammatory prodrome before you get the full blown gout. And I actually looked at the ball of her foot and I could see a little blanched, kind of white colored pale spot. That's a tophi, they call it. Well, I gave her the colchicum autumnal, no problem, no pain, no symptoms, went away.
Because I was
And
going to ask that. Why is gout more prevalent in men than women? So that's interesting that your wife
they
has
probably
such.
take a worse care of their health than the women.
Do you
They
think
probably drink
maybe,
more, higher
d-
purine diets. They might be predisposed to it because estrogen has a lot of anti-inflammatory, antioxidant properties,
well, I
and
was going
men
to
don't have
say,
that benefit.
I'm sorry, I was going to say
That's
progesterone
right.
as well, because
Oh
women have
yeah.
higher levels of progesterone, and progesterone can help with methylation too,
Yes.
and even thyroid
Yes.
function, but
Yeah.
men don't
That's why
have as
they're
much.
far more vulnerable after menopause because once you lose the protection of those God-given hormones, now LP(a) goes up, oxidation goes up, a lot of risk factors cascade. Now, men, it just simmers and it has sort of a linear uh, intensification over time. Women, it's not 100% normal, but at least with normal hormone output, it
Yeah.
keeps them in check. It doesn't make them completely normal, but LP(a) will already be high before menopause, and then it goes up. Kathy Jean, I remember when she went through menopause, hers spiked up. And that's when we started to get serious about the niacin dose.
And that's where her progesterone would have been go
I love you,
almost
Kathy
gone.
Jean. You know, she's going, it's time for your haircut.
So, well, this is our last question. And anyway, in a previous podcast, you'd said if you go to see your doctor, don't be overly polite. They work for you. You said there are 5 markers that you should, at the very least, get tested. What would those
Right.
5 markers be?
Well, the straight ahead cardiac stuff, and it's all overlap, but you want to ApoB. It's all the bad particles. You don't need to fast. That number should be less than 65. LP(a), there's nanomoles and there's mass. Milligrams per deciliter is mass. You want that 30 or less. Nanomoles, NMOL slash capital L, you want it 70 or less. Okay. That tells you you inherited it. Usually you already know you got family history, particularly a father, a brother, a male relative who had a heart attack at a comparatively young age, like 60 years old, 65 years old, or less. Okay. Then you want to know, do I have plaque from all of that that could rupture and cause a heart attack or stroke? LP dash PLA2. All right, then let's get into the other stuff. Kidneys. You want a cystatin C, not a creatinine. And just for SHITS and giggles, I didn't say the word, I just spelled it. Order the creatinine, but get the cystatin C and then show your doctor how far apart they were. Maybe he'll stop just relying on creatinine. And whether you order that correctly or not, get the damn urine. To a urine citrate, pretty important for acidosis, and more importantly, a urine albumin creatinine ratio. Now you've caught most of the spectrum of vascular risk and kidney disease. And that'll enable you to rule out acidosis. The thyroid and the insulin resistance, you can do those at home. We can go through that on the next podcast. So I'll show them. You can put it on the screen. I have a little tip sheet of how to do it. And
Okay.
the grid has Celsius and Fahrenheit. So whether you're from Great Britain or Canada, you can convert them and how to, do the axillary temperature, how long to set the timer, and all the guidance on that. Very specific.
Okay.
And then the other one is a $12 glucometer if you don't already have a glucose monitor in the house. It's $12 on Amazon. Every home in North America should have it because of our lifestyle.
Yeah.
And then just stick your finger after a large mixed meal that has some carbs, glass of wine, dessert, scoop of mashed potatoes. Mashed potatoes will provoke it worse than anything else. That's good. You want to provoke your pancreas to make insulin and a lot of it to see how well the control is an hour later. And again, I'll show you the sheet to mark those numbers down and what's considered normal or abnormal. And you're off to the races because the thyroid and the glucose check, you can do at home. You don't have to have a doctor participate.
Mhm.
And the rest of it, you pretty much need the blood work and the urine. But those are the most important ones in my world because that helps me pinpoint the diagnosis effectively and early rather
Mhm.
than miss it until it's too late.
Okay. Perfect.
That's a
We
lot.
made it. We did it.
It's like spitballs. I throw 20 at the wall, three sticks. 3 out of 20 is pretty good.
Yeah, it
I
is.
can always get somebody on the phone a second or third time, sometimes 20 times the first 2 weeks. But eventually it sticks. And then I have 20 spitballs that stuck to the wall instead of three.
Yeah.
But repetition's not a bad thing.
No, it's not. Repetition equals consistency, which equals results. Stephen, I'll let you go. Thank you.
Okay,
Happy Christmas to you and your lovely
you
wife.
betcha. Yeah, it's weird. It's a UK thing to say happy, and here we say merry. What's the
I,
difference?
I
It's
know.
it's it's the
Happy
thought that
sounds better.
counts. Or
Bye.
happy Hanukkah. I think Hanukkah started yesterday.
Maybe. Thank
Or
you.
Kwanzaa or any of those.